Thank you for joining us for this episode of Talking Health in the 406, where we are one community under the big sky. I'm one of your hosts, Mackenzie Jones, advocate of disability inclusion, accessibility, and health.
And I'm Margaret Mullins, the Social Determinants of Health Program Coordinator in the Chronic Disease Bureau here at the Department of Public Health and Human Services.
For this episode, we're going to hear from Melanie Williams, who is caregiver to her mother with Alzheimer's and is now the executive director of the Montana chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. We will also hear from Kyla Rock, the Alzheimer and Dementia program manager in the Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion Bureau within DPHHS. Let's start with some facts about Alzheimer's in Montana.
There are 21,000 Montanans, that's about 9.8%, age 65 and older, that have Alzheimer's. And in 2021, Montana had 9 geriatricians and 7,190 home health and personal care aides. So to meet the 2050 demand, Montana will need to add an additional 50 geriatricians and 2,480 home health and personal care aides. Also in 2021, 341 people died of Alzheimer's disease. There are 1,329 emergency department visits for every 1,000 people with dementia, and there is a true financial burden. $22,360 were spent by Medicaid per person with dementia in 2023. So this is a topic that we certainly deserves our attention. I think we'd like to start, we've mentioned who our guests are, but I'd like you to hear from both of them. So we will start with Melanie. If you could just tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got involved in this work.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Melanie Williams, and as Mackenzie said, I'm the executive director for the Montana chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. This is a very new career for me, just within the last 3 years. I started as a community engagement manager, then became the program director, and now the executive director. And it all stemmed from my role as a caregiver for my mom. At the time, I was actually a public school teacher, and I was in that role for 30 years, 30 fabulous years of teaching. But that's when my mom's journey started, when I was still teaching and floundering around as a caregiver, and it led me to where I am today, and hopefully can bring more care and support and resources to caregivers than I felt I had at that time.
Thanks, Melanie. And Kyla, please tell us a little bit about your involvement.
So my name's Kyla Rock, and I am one of Mackenzie and Margaret's coworkers in the Public Health and Safety Division within DPHHS. And I do oversee the Alzheimer's and Dementia program, which entails managing the BOLD grant, which we were awarded last year, and that stands for Building Our Largest Dementia Infrastructure.
Thank you, Melanie and Kyla. The Talking Health in the 406 podcast was created so that Montanans could share their stories about health, healing, and community. Melanie, why is telling your story so important?
Telling my story is so important because there has been such a stigma around Alzheimer's and dementia for so many years that people are afraid to talk about it. And because of that, they don't know where to go for resources. It's not very common knowledge where resources are available. It also makes you feel very isolated and alone. You feel very helpless. You feel like you're on an island and you're not sure what you're navigating. And so I think talking about it will bring people together. It will build community. It will build a network of support. That network might change throughout the course of the disease, but knowing that somebody else is there going through the same thing that you can relate to is so powerful. There's power in having community around you when you are on this journey.
Thank you, Melanie. So you mentioned that your journey into the Alzheimer's Association started with your mom and feeling like you needed to find all these resources, and then realizing the importance of sharing your story and that you could do this. You could do this to support other people in a similar situation.
So Melanie, you spoke about your mom and that you have a story there. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share with us a little bit about her and your experiences.
Yes, absolutely. So my mom was ahead of her time. She was a trailblazer, I always say. She was very academic, very intelligent. She had a lot of pride in that. She earned her doctorate when I was actually just starting college myself. She then became a licensed professional counselor. She had a pilot's license in the early 70s. She was always breaking the mold of what traditional was. If somebody told her that women shouldn't do something, she made sure she went out and did that. So she was fantastic in that era of just, finding new paths for women, standing up for women as far as what they were capable of doing and not having any boundaries. She was really the one that really initiated in us that education was the key to whatever we wanted. And that was very, very important to her. And so to see her start to show signs of things not connecting in her brain or her thinking was very devastating for us. And I think it was very devastating for her. I think we all went through a different grief cycle. And the biggest one was probably denial. All of us were sure it was something else. I was sure it was stress. I was sure she wasn't drinking enough water. I was sure she wasn't managing her diabetes correctly. She would talk a lot about how she was losing her memory or she wasn't thinking right. And she would tell people this, but because I think she was so intelligent, it was hard to believe. She presented so well, and she was such an amazing communicator and had such a vast vocabulary that it didn't show up in presentation because she could talk about very intellectual topics still. And so nobody really believed her because it's like, how could this person present so well who's so intelligent and so kind and so caring and so compassionate and has helped so many people, whether she was in the education world, she was at the University of Great Falls, where she was a huge advocate for Native American students. And some of them still reach out to me today to tell me what an influence she had on them finishing their degrees at the University of Great Falls. Or she was counseling. People just talked about what an impact she had on their life. And so she could present so eloquently and so compassionately that I think when she started to tell her doctors and others, I think something's wrong with my thinking, we were all like, no, it's got to be something else. And for me, I was just scared to death because I thought, I don't know what to do if it is a dementia or an Alzheimer's. I don't know where you go. I don't even know what next steps are. So I had heard once, well, when they start putting their shoes in the refrigerator, then it's Alzheimer's. So all this crazy stuff was going on, but I thought, well, at least she hasn't put her shoes in the refrigerator yet. But she had been doing things that were very similar. So there was a lot of denial. There was a lot of negotiating, just hoping it was something else, trying to figure out something else that was going on, trying to reduce stress in her life, trying to help her manage her diabetes. What I learned in all that is that my stress was escalating because I was working so hard to try to keep hers down. I was compensating a lot for her when she was forgetting appointments or forgetting to be someplace like a doctor's appointment or losing her car. I was the one compensating for it by trying to not necessarily cover it up, but justify it. And so I was becoming exhausted. My own kids were in high school at the time, so I was trying to follow their sports, trying to stay connected with them. They were going to school 15 miles south of where I live, and mom was living 15 miles north. And so I was running in either direction quite a bit, either running in to check on mom or running to my kids' sporting events. And I was still teaching full time. So the harder I tried, the worse it seemed to get. And of course, when you have something like type 1 diabetes and dementia, which we didn't know at the time, it just makes that problem that much worse because managing it became very difficult for her. So then I became part of her management. And I remember when her diabetic team told me, they said, well, you are your mom's caregiver. And I looked at them and I'm like, oh no, nobody takes care of my mom. She's been very independent all her life. And when they said that, it was kind of a shock. And that was just for her diabetes. That wasn't even the dementia. It just kind of hit me like, my mom doesn't need taken care of. And so it took me a while to grapple with that. Like, well, what does that mean? What do I need to do? And of course, as a caregiver, you have to find that fine line of how much do you do for them and how much do you set in place so they can be independent. And it seems like that's an everyday balancing act of trying to find out what they're still capable of doing, because you don't want to take away everything. You don't want to rob them of their dignity and and who they've always been. So we got her a CGM, which took a while because of some Medicare logistics. But then I found the CGM just stressed me out more because now I'm getting up in the middle of the night to go check on her because she won't answer her phone. And she's sleeping just fine, not realizing that her blood sugar is plummeting. So my stress, like I said, was going up. Well, she just kind of went on her merry way. So it was after about 5 years of that and several hospitalizations that the team said, your mom can't live independently anymore. She's not managing her diabetes. It's getting worse. She's ending up in the hospital too many times. And so at that time, we had to look outside of Helena because no assisted livings in Helena were equipped to take a type 1 diabetic. So she moved near my brother in Billings, and it was then they diagnosed her with dementia. And in a way, it was kind of a relief, but then it was also like, oh no, now what? So now we have this new thing too that we're dealing with, and it explained a lot. And every time I talk to somebody who has a family member with dementia, all of us do it. We say, oh, looking back, there were signs, 5 years before, 10 years before. But I think we all go through that negotiating stage where we think if we can just fix this for them, or if we can just take away this stress, if we can just start managing their finances, we think it'll help. And the thing with dementia, it's a progressive disease, and it might help things in the physical situation, but it's not going to help their dementia. So once she got there and we got her into an assisted living, I thought, oh, this will be nice. I can just enjoy my mom for who she is. I don't have to worry about her diabetes. And that was very, very true. However, I learned that the emotional toll of dementia became more profound. And I was the one that got a lot of the phone calls when she was really upset, and especially through COVID, wondering what she had done for us to put her in jail. Why did she have to live like that? All the anger, which nobody in COVID, none of us knew how to handle that conversation. And so a lot of phone calls just trying to talk her through it. So I started doing little things with her where I'd say, Mom, let's write a book, because she always wanted to write a book. That was always her goal. So I said, why don't we start writing about your childhood experiences? So we do a lot of, deferring and deflecting and trying to get people off topic when they perseverate. So that helped us with a lot of that time, is just having her tell me a story and I would type it. And then the disease, of course, progressed in those 5 years until we lost her this last February. So
that was a really important story, Melanie, and a really, really hard journey to have to be on. One of the things that I heard when you were talking was negotiating sort of that this reality was coming to pass. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think comes up, or when people start seeing signs, your tendency, of course, is denial, like you mentioned, but also that this is age related. Oh, mm-hmm. I know it could be dementia, but I'm fairly certain, given my mother's age, it's just her age. Are there things that you might inform the listeners about to help them recognize perhaps one?
Yeah, we talk a lot about, so now I'm speaking more as the executive director. We talk a lot about normal aging versus dementia. And I can use my mom as an example, but it looks a little bit different in everybody. Forgetting names, forgetting addresses, forgetting the day of the week are fairly normal as we age. The difference is most of us either have the ability to figure out what day it is. We look at our phone, we look at a calendar, we figure it out, or the name or the address comes back to us at some point, or we know how to find it, and then we carry on. Somebody with dementia doesn't always have that ability. And so once they forget something, it's gone. And there was a man in Montana that explained to me, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he said, it's like it didn't even make it into my short-term memory. He said, my wife will send me outside to do something. And he said, I'll go outside. And it didn't even make it into my short term. So I get outside and I do my own thing and I, do whatever I want to. And I come in and she's all upset. And I don't understand why she's so upset, because he said, I don't even have it in my short term memory, what she told me. And I think that's the biggest difference, or that's one of the signs, is that they can't even recall it. Even when you bring it to their attention, Most of us would say, oh, shoot, yeah, I forgot. That's what I was going to do. Where you walk into a room, forget what you were going in there for, you walk back out and you're like, oh, yeah, that's what it was. Somebody with dementia often doesn't have that recall. So they can't recall. And then the other piece is that ability to problem solve. I noticed it with my mom with her pump. She had been using a pump for her diabetes for quite some time and all of a sudden forgot how to troubleshoot. So one day she called me and she said, I think the battery's going dead. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'll be right in. It takes me about 20 minutes to get to her house. I said, I'll be right in. Don't do anything. I get to her house and she's gone. The pump is in pieces all over the counter. The battery is gone and mom is gone. And I'm like, oh boy, this is not good. So I called her and I'm like, hey, mom, where are you? Oh, I'm at Goodwill. She loved Goodwill. I'm at Goodwill. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, where's the battery? Oh, it's in my pocket. But in her mind, that was not bizarre. There was nothing about that didn't make sense. And I said, okay, well, I said, we'll need to get a new battery and then I can't reprogram your pump. So we've lost all of that. You'll have to take it back to your doctor. And she said, oh, no, you're smart. I'm sure you can figure it out. So her ability to realize what she had done wasn't there anymore. And remember, this is a woman who had a PhD. She's highly intelligent. But things like that started happening that she was just like, I don't get what the big deal is. It's so I took my pump apart and I have the battery in my pocket. Why is that a problem? And so trying to explain to her, well, now we have to do the shots all weekend because I don't have any way to reprogram this. I'm not a doctor. Things like that start to happen. They might be driving to a familiar location and forget where it is. I heard about a gentleman who was a principal at a school for years. He was driving to work one day and got back home and his wife said, what are you doing? And he said, I don't remember how to drive to my school. They might be following a favorite recipe that they've always done and all of a sudden forget the order of things. And just reading it doesn't always help them. They can't make sense of all that. So when you start to notice a change from what they've been, maybe even in their finances, misspending money or spending large amounts, writing checks for the wrong amount or forgetting how to write a check. I noticed that with my mom. She'd forget to sign them, which is maybe a good problem if you have dementia, but just changes. So if somebody's always been like that, that's not dementia. But if they've been pretty meticulous or, kept their house clean, things like that, and then you see a change, that might be a sign of a form of dementia.
Earlier, you used the acronym CGM. What does that mean?
Constant glucose monitoring. So for folks who have diabetes, they can wear a little patch so that you can monitor their blood sugars from your phone. So my brother and I were able to keep track of my mom's blood sugars on our phones so we could help her with that when we were helping her manage her diabetes.
So I want to go back and kind of hear more about your story. You as the caregiver for your mom, and that's the word you use, caregiver.
I do. I know there's a lot of conversation about as a care partner, caregiver. Just from my personal experience, I do feel like it's more of a caregiver because as the journey progresses, you are giving more and more of yourself to the disease. And so it's not that the person is helpless. It's just that the disease has robbed them of what they're able to do. And it's up to the caregiver to give to that so that they can live a better quality of life. I did feel like a caregiver. I was giving a lot of my time, a lot of my energy, a lot of my emotion to this disease. Mom, I always loved. That never wavered. But I say I was giving a lot of me to the disease to care for mom. So
thanks for explaining that and hearing how taxing it was on you, how you gave so much of yourself to the disease. How did you take care of yourself day to day? How did you make sure you were taking care of your mental health and your physical health?
Well, for one thing, I have an amazing family. My husband and kids were all very, very understanding. When my kids were doing sports, because they went to a small school, they were involved in everything. At first, when mom was in the hospital, and it always seemed to happen on the weekend, of course. So at first, when she was in the hospital, I'd go sit with her in the hospital all weekend and miss their games, or maybe only get part of a game. And finally, one day, somebody said to me, your mom is fine. She is where she needs to be, and people have eyes on her all the time. So when she's in the hospital, You go do your life. You take a break. And that was like the best advice I could have received at that time, because I was thinking, oh no, she's in the hospital. I need to sit with her day and night. And hearing that, because she honestly didn't remember if I was there the whole time or not, but hearing that helped me kind of detach. So using those times when she was in the hospital, and I certainly didn't like it that she was there, but it was a time for me to step back and say, okay, this is also my time to take a break and know they've got it handled. So I would step back then. My family was so understanding, though, and amazing. There were times when I'd be teaching, the hospital would call or mom would call, and she was in the hospital. She would go into what's called DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis, because she was forgetting how to manage her diabetes. And when that gets too extreme, they have to be hospitalized to bring those levels back down. And since I was a teacher, I couldn't just up and run to the hospital. So my husband was amazing at going and sitting with her until I could get there. And one thing about DKA and then the dementia on top of it is they really get loopy. I used to call it the drunken sailor state, because it didn't matter what you asked them. It was just the answers didn't make sense. Mom had no inhibition. She'd be throwing the blankets off, and, just it was not a pretty sight at all, and it was not fun to sit through. But my husband would very patiently and graciously go sit with her until I could get there. Mostly at the beginning, we need to be there to tell the doctors what was happening, that, in her DKA state, along with, we didn't realize it was dementia, but in her DKA state, she just made no sense at all. And so, you're not going to get any good answers out of her right now. If they said, what brings you in here today? She'd say, well, when I was 8 years old. And she was like, and we're like, do you want the short version or the long version? Because she'll go back to when she was 8 and tell you everything. So, and then I also, when my kids were in high school, kind of for myself, I decided to become a yoga instructor. And even though it keeps me really busy, I try to use my yoga for my own personal health care too. So teaching it keeps me accountable to my students and to myself, and it's kind of my safe place. And finding that time every week, I still teach about 4 classes a week. I've also added some cycling classes. That's my joy. I really do find joy in that time and taking that time for myself. I put on yoga retreats, and they are as much for me as they are for the participants. So because living a healthy lifestyle has always been important to me, that part wasn't as hard. Other than, like I said, the time and the emotion, I had to learn how to balance that. But I did figure out how to use my yoga for me and use my cycling for me. I hike some too, just that alone time sometimes to process your thoughts. But it still was very emotionally and physically taxing at times, definitely.
How else was your family involved in supporting you and your mom during this time?
I think sometimes my family was a nice distraction in a good way. As recently as last fall, my mom fell and broke her hip in October, and that was kind of what propelled her disease to the point that she passed in February. But she fell and broke her hip in October, and it was very difficult to get rehab, to get care for her. So I was spending a lot of time in Billings. Out of the blue, my daughter said, Mom, I would love for you to come and meet my class. She teaches up in Creston up by Kalispell. She said, I have the most amazing class this year, and I would love for you to come and meet them. Can you come up? And I was thinking, oh no, I can't. Mom needs me right now. And then I thought, wait a minute, that's what I want to do. That's the good stuff. And I can't do much more for my mom right now. I mean, there was nothing I could do to stop the progression. I could be there, which was emotionally hard because she was struggling so much. But just that little invite, it's like my family just kind of knows what I need when I need it. And so just that invite to go up to see her class and spend a day or two in her classroom to watch her teach. I was a teacher, so of course I am very proud of that. But to watch her teach, to be around the young kids, it just filled my cup. And so I don't know if they do it intentionally or not, but they do seem to know what I need when I need it. And they have that intuitive mindset of when mom needs something. And my husband is great too. He's been amazing through all of this. He's the very level-headed one. And so when my emotions were all over the map, he was the one that would just keep the keel even, I guess, for us. So,
Melanie, your family was such a huge support to you. I'm wondering, though, what other resources you had. I'm sure you started to explore what was available, what other people's experiences were. I'm wondering a little bit about that process. I'm thinking about people listening to this podcast and starting on this journey.
Yeah.
Sorts of things they might try and what was helpful to you.
I think we're always afraid of the unknown. When we don't know something about something, it scares us even more. So the first thing I did when I found out she was diagnosed was to learn as much as I could about dementia. And that's kind of when I stumbled on the Alzheimer's Association website and also on their volunteer opportunities. And as a volunteer educator, you get a lot of education on the disease, but really immersing myself in learning what was happening, why it was happening, what was going on in the brain, and realizing that because we hang on to trying to fix it and we spend so much energy trying to fix it. And when you finally let go of that and realize, okay, I can't fix this, the brain is biologically and physiologically changing, and there's nothing I can do to stop that. But understanding what's happening in the disease course can help me accept it and accept where mom is. And so learning that was a huge help. There were still many, many, many rocky parts of the journey. And we have a helpline that's staffed with master level clinicians who specialize in dementia. They're available 24/7. And I remember one night I was at my wit's end with mom. I don't know if she would sundown. I think it was a form of sundowning, but she could call me in a rage and rage for like 45 minutes sometimes about how angry she was about everything, which I didn't blame her. And the one thing I learned is that when somebody has a dementia, and especially somebody like my mom, who's always been able to process information, then to all of a sudden have that go away, she had no way to process the stimuli from all the day, from the whole day. But I think when she was in the assisted living and even the memory care, she was still thinking like a counselor. She was still trying to help everybody and figure out the social dynamics of the group and, who was manipulating who. And she told me one time, she said, I think that lady just wants that man's money, but I haven't noticed she has any new clothes. So maybe he's not giving her any. So I think she spent so much time analyzing people still, but then couldn't process it. And so by the end of the day, she was just overwhelmed because she had taken in all this information. So once I figured that out, that unloading piece wasn't as hard for me. And sometimes what I would do, this was another self-care thing. I enjoy puzzles. And so I would just sit and work on a puzzle and put my phone on speakerphone and just kind of let her go. Just let her rage, let her get angry. And the puzzle would keep me calm and keep me from feeling like I had to respond to everything. But she had that time to let everything out. And then after about 45 minutes, she'd be okay. And that would calm her down. And she would have forgotten why she called me. And I got a lot of my puzzle done. But one night I did call our helpline. It was like 9 o'clock at night. And I thought, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And because it is wearing still, even with my puzzle, it's still wearing. And I called our helpline. And I think for the first 20 minutes, I just sat and cried. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't even know what's wrong. And they said, that's okay. That's what we're here for. And just hearing somebody say, it's okay. If you need to just sit here and cry, just sit here and cry. It helped so much. And then to hear them say, they didn't ever overreact. When I called our helpline, it wasn't like, oh no, or, oh, they didn't ever overreact. They just said, okay. And then we walked through a plan. And it just felt good to know, okay, we have a plan. We have something we can try, something tangible, because we can't ever predict the trajectory of this disease. They say once you know one person with dementia, you know one person with dementia. They're all so different, and they all progress in the disease so differently. So you might have things handled today. What we noticed with my mom, it was almost a plateau. We'd get things figured out, where she was emotionally, where she was physically, and she was always very physically strong and very, very mobile, which was a little bit of a sometimes not so fun when somebody has dementia and they're in a lockdown unit. But so we'd figure out where she was, what she made her happy. I would take her to lunch and take her to Goodwill. She loved those two things, even though she got to the point she couldn't remember how to get out of the car or how to order. She still loved going out. She was one of those, it was funny, she liked the stimulus of being out. She liked going to lunch. She liked going to Goodwill. But after about 2 hours, she was ready to go back. So we'd be like on that plateau where that was working great for a while, and then all of a sudden it would just drop drastically. So it's not like this nice, even, predictable trajectory. You just never know when it's going to throw you a curveball, and all of a sudden everything you've been doing doesn't work, and so you have to quickly try something else. We always say you have to have lots of tools in your toolbox, kind of like a middle school teacher, because what's been working might not work now, and you have to switch gears totally to whatever works at this point.
I thought that was an incredibly helpful answer, because that fact that nobody's trajectory is the same. People listening may think my mother does this, but my mother didn't do that. And understanding that you, most importantly, had a place to call who could listen.
Yeah.
Because everybody has that point, I think, where the things that they've used to help them deal with the difficult times might not be enough.
Yeah.
Really great to know about the hotline number.
It's very, very helpful.
Melanie, another question about your mom. You talked about near the end of her life, she had broken her hip, and that was the beginning of the end. And what was it like for you during that time when it was leading to the end of her life? How did you process that grief, and what supports did you seek out during that time?
We had Mom on hospice, which was huge. It was very, very helpful. I think, too, my brother and I would talk a lot about it, and we'd remember back to what Mom had told us. Now I'll get emotional. But Mom used to tell us, don't let me get like that. And so that really helped us at the end to start to let go. Because she didn't want to be like that. She never wanted to live that way. So that was helpful in letting her go. And then I think celebrating what she did do, remembering back, it was a good time to reflect, and I still do. Reflect back on all that she accomplished. And even though the last 5 years especially felt like 50 sometimes in her lifespan, it's actually such a small part of her life. It was still very, it had a huge impact on us, but it really was a nice time to think back to all she did, to what she stood for. Even, it's kind of weird, but this year on the 4th of July, we were at a family outing. We always go to a lake with my husband's family, and they do a big 4th of July party and celebrate veterans. And there's a time to honor vets. And for some reason, my mom came to mind, because I just thought of everything she did to pave the way for women. And I thought she was a vet in her own way, in her own right. She did so much to say, don't let anybody tell you you can't. And so just remembering what she stood for, what she built up. She wasn't a fighter, but she showed through her words, she showed through her actions that you can do anything you want to, you can help others, you can have a huge impact. And you don't have to fight to do that, but I feel like she was a vet in that regard. She did so much to stand up for me, for my daughter, and just said, and I even feel, and I tell people this all the time now, when this executive director position opened up and they asked me to apply, if you had told me 10 years ago I was going to be executive director, I'm like, there's no way. I can't do that job. But I almost felt like when it opened up, it was after Mom passed, I felt like she was saying, yes, you can. Go do it. What are you doing? Stop sitting around. You have work to do. Now go get it done. Just because that's how she operated. It's like, don't sit around and talk about what could be done. Go do it. And so I really felt like she paved that pathway too, and said, don't ever say no. Don't say no. So it was emotional, but at the same time it was almost a relief at the end, because she got to the point that she was unrecognizable as our mom. There was just so little that we could cling to that was still our mom. The one thing that I could do when I was in the hospital with her at night, I would play Willie Nelson and Patsy Cline and Dolly Parton, and she loved that music, and that was the closest that I got to my real mom at the end. was playing those. So it was and almost easy to let go at that time, knowing she never wanted to be there. So sorry, I always end up crying at some point in time.
Oh, please don't be sorry. That is it's a very hard but such a meaningful story and experience to have had. The fact that you took on the position at the Alzheimer's Association is such a, your comparison to what your mom would have wanted you to do adds so much significance to your position there. And I think about how can something that is so incredibly hard and difficult be turned around for good, which is that experience is a really powerful one. And the amount of good you can do for other people, I can just imagine would be exactly what she would have wanted.
Yeah. And it's so rewarding. I mean, I can't help her, but I can help so many more people now.
Listening to you share the story about the impact your mom made on so many people's lives, before we switch over to asking you professional questions, I wanted to know how did she inspire you? If you look back, what did she do, or in what ways was most inspirational for you as a person and throughout your life?
Mom saw the good in everybody. And I think even at the university level, when a student was struggling or, looking like they might not make it, Mom found the positive. So she found something to build on, some piece of them that she knew could do it. And then she built on that. And she seemed to do that with everybody. I mean, we all have people in our lives that kind of drive us crazy. I don't think my mom really did. There were a few people maybe, but she just always saw hope in people. She always saw potential in people. And I think even in my teaching, I was influenced by that. I know my daughter is. And my daughter's actually going to school to become a school counselor, just like my mom started too. She just had a way of seeing the good. And even if people had, some of those issues about them that are kind of hard socially for us to accept sometimes, Mom could somehow see through that and see what potential there was in that person, to the point that when she had her dementia, and I didn't know it, but I used to run by her house in the morning to kind of check on her, and her doors would be wide open. And, nothing's locked, doors are wide open. And one time I said, Mom, I wonder if you should lock your doors at night. And she said, I have never been scared of people all my life. I'm not going to be now. And she really wasn't. She was not scared of people. She loved people. She loved who they were, and she loved their souls. And so I think that has inspired me as much as anything, is just to always try to find the good, always try to find the positive and lift that up in people, and then watching them blossom from that. And like I said, the people that reached out when she passed and told me how they impacted her life was just incredible. I mean, stories I had never heard of ways that she had helped people overcome and succeed was very impactful. And man, if I can leave that legacy, I would be thrilled.
Thank you, Melanie. Is there anything right now that stands out that you want to share more about your mom or your personal experience in being her caregiver?
I always tell people I had several moms. And so I know we grieve the person that we lost, that we knew for most of our life. But what I tried to do in each stage was learn to love that mom. And whatever, stage she was in, and I loved her little quips. When I would try to talk to her about how to manage her diabetes a little better, or maybe drink more water, when she was done talking, she'd always say, well, we sure are complicated creatures, aren't we? So I actually named my Walk to End Alzheimer's team that, because you knew that was the end of the conversation. When she said that, the conversation was over. So I just learned to appreciate her quips. When she broke her hip, her mind, it definitely affects the mind in unbelievable ways. And she had recognized me up until then. But like I said, I stayed with her quite a bit at the hospital just to help out. And she looked at me one night and she said, you sure remind me of my daughter. And, it was kind of sobering, but at the same time, I thought, oh, I'm going to use this. I said, oh, what was she like? Try to get some goods out of my mom. She said, well, she was kind of bossy and she always thought she was the queen. I don't know that that's really what she thought most of my life. She didn't tell me if she did. And I don't know that I was that bossy, but anyway, just, tried to embrace who she was in that moment, I think helped me as much as anything.
I would just like you to give us a little description of your work with the Alzheimer's Association and what they do for people who are dealing with Alzheimer's and for their families.
So we have several areas that we work in. The one that I started in is programs, education, and support. So we're really trying to meet caregivers where they're at, as well as people living with dementia, and provide resources for where they're at in the journey, and then also provide resources for the long term, because there are some decisions you should start making early on about the long-term course of the disease, as well as, the here and now. And so educating people on some of the things they should be thinking about, maybe long-term, and then also just today, I'm getting ready to do a workshop, and it's called Empowering the Caregiver. And so really bringing them tools and resources that will help make this journey less stressful, maybe more enjoyable. We talk about compassionate communication. We talk about what might be triggering behaviors and how caregivers react to those differently. So really trying to bring quality of life, I think, basically, and knowledge about the disease to them as much as possible. We are also working with public health as far as risk reduction and looking at what people can do as far as lifestyle changes to reduce their risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia. There are some treatments right now available in the United States. They're not available in Montana yet, but we do a lot with research. The Alzheimer's Association has funded millions of dollars of research, and the research, it's fascinating right now. I went to AAIC in Philadelphia in July, and there were over 8,000 in attendance, and most of them are scientists researching this area from all over the world. And just even to walk down the halls and listen to the excitement in their voices as they talk about their research is mind-boggling, and it's so inspiring. And I think some of the research that's directly impacting Montana right now is research on a new blood test. At the moment, you can't get diagnosed with Alzheimer's in Montana. You have to drive to Spokane because we don't have a nuclear pharmacy, and that's the nuclear compound that's needed for the PET scan has only a 2-hour shelf life. So logistically, it just doesn't work to bring it into Montana. So people need to drive to Spokane or another major health facility or health institution. So this blood test, it's now proving 90% accuracy in preliminary research. Also, like my mom, she could fake her way through the mini-cog pre-screening and through the MOCA pre-screening because she was fairly smart. And so she always looked average. And even though we told the doctor, well, she's never been average, she still scored average and she could kind of fake it. So the blood test is, as you know, you can't really argue much with blood tests. I think that will change the landscape in Montana. So we're looking forward to that. And then, like I said, there are some treatments available. They are infusion right now, but just like cancer treatment, we're at the very beginning stages, and it might seem and feel a little bit barbaric right now. So that's where we're working with public health and with the BOLD grant, which stands for Building Our Largest Dementia Infrastructure, to really talk about lifestyle changes and how you can prevent. There's actually research right now that is showing that you can reduce your risk of developing dementia or slow the progression of it by 40% through a healthy lifestyle. And in my mind, that supersedes any treatment that's out there. So we do a lot in that arena. We work a lot on policy, both at the state and national level. We are purple, we're bipartisan. So we work on both sides of the aisle, working towards more support for caregivers, working towards more money for research, and looking at more solutions to how we can support people in the home so that they can maybe stay at home longer, putting more support in place in the workplace. This is definitely affecting the workplace. People are leaving jobs early. They're having to cut back on hours because the average caregiver gives about 30 hours a week to this disease. And if they're working full time, that's exhausting. So we're trying to work with corporations and with our legislature to help them realize that caregivers of those with dementia are having to change jobs, retire early, cut back on hours, just to be a dementia caregiver, because it is very challenging. And then just a lot of awareness work, letting people know we're here, where to find resources, where to go. even questions to ask their doctor. If they're not sure where to start, we can give them questions to ask their doctors to start the conversation. So those are the main areas that we focus on and what we're growing in Montana.
That's great information. I do have one question just to back up. I had heard a lot about the research and the blood test. And can you tell us what the blood test actually detects?
Yeah. So that's one thing that's unfortunate is a lot of the diagnostic tools, I guess you could say, that are being looked at right now are only for Alzheimer's. So the blood test and even the spinal fluid tests are picking up on those hallmarks of Alzheimer's that we see in the brain. So the plaques and tangles, the tau tangles and the plaques that we see in the brain, they're finding ways to find those. I don't know if they see them in that same form, but they're able to detect them in blood now earlier. They say that some of those changes in our brain are happening 20 years before we ever have the first symptoms of Alzheimer's. And so if we can start tracking that in blood tests early on, maybe through early diagnosis, people will change their lifestyle, or we can start doing things earlier so the disease doesn't progress as quickly. And I call it right now living well with dementia. What can we put in place so if people do have dementia, maybe they stay in those early stages, but they can live well like that for a while, and they just build in memory aids that will help them with some of those day-to-day activities. So that's the other dementias. There's Lewy body, there's frontotemporal, there's vascular. Parkinson's is considered a dementia. Many of those might have testing that could help them determine what they think it might be, but it's honestly right now a big guessing game for physicians, other than if they actually go get the PET scan. And I've talked to many, many physicians who say this. They do a lot of testing to rule out what it's not. And then when they've ruled out everything it's not, it usually means it's a dementia. But it's very difficult for them to tell you, you have this, it will look like this, it's going to progress like this, and here's what we're going to do. That's still so vague and arbitrary right now in this field.
One of the things that you mention is if we can get some indication that someone is inclined towards Alzheimer's or those plaques are there, that healthy habits are a big help. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about healthy habits for the brain. What kind of habits best support brain health?
So sleep is a big one, challenging your brain. My mom's doctor used to tell her, Audrey, what are you doing to challenge your brain? And she'd say, oh, I'm still working. I'm still counseling people. And he'd say, but you could counsel in your sleep. You can't do something that comes easy to you. He'd say, what are you doing to challenge your brain? And she'd get a little offended. Then she'd say, well, we sure are complicated creatures, aren't we? That would be the end of that conversation. So it's really about something that kind of makes your brain hurt. And I tell people that. I say, when you reach that point of frustration, like whether it's technology or working on a game or a puzzle, that's actually a good thing. That's like weight training for your brain. It's like when you lift weights and you get to that point of muscle fatigue or muscle failure where you're like, oh, I can't do another one of these. That's when our brain it's working then, because we're challenging it. So people who do word puzzles every day may or may not be doing something good for their brain, because if they're good at word puzzles and they enjoy it, it's probably not taxing their brain in the right way. Also, staying in school, so learning something new. They say learning a second language is one of the best things for your brain. And actually, people who are bilingual or trilingual, or in India, people who know maybe up to 50 languages, they have found that their brains are more resilient. Also, eating clean food, which we know for heart disease, we know for keeping blood pressure down, and physical exercise. I can't go into all the chemicals in the brain, but I do know that exercise increases those feel good hormones, I'll call them. The chemical release in the brain from exercise is also very beneficial for the brain. Socializing. Socializing is huge. And we learned that during COVID, that people with dementia during COVID declined significantly. And they think it's because there wasn't much social interaction. And I heard one doctor explain it as, when we're socializing with people, more in person probably, but we're reading all sorts of body language. So it's not just about listening to words. We're reading their face, we're reading their facial cues, we're reading their body language. There's a lot that the brain is taking in and analyzing and dissecting and processing when we're socializing. And so it doesn't have to be huge parties, but just getting out and visiting. And for that reason, the Alzheimer's Association is encouraging early stage social engagement programs or memory cafes to get out and with people that are in the similar journey and socialize in a safe space, keeping your blood pressure down, managing your diabetes. There's been a little bit of a misunderstanding lately saying that Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes, and that's not something that the Alzheimer's Association supports, nor does the CDC. So that's kind of a misnomer that we hope to try to squelch, because it oversimplifies Alzheimer's, and it also implies that diabetes is a form of dementia, which it's not. They're not one and the same and shouldn't be treated one and the same.
That's good clarification to have.
We are within the Chronic Disease Prevention Health Promotion Bureau, and you just expressed so many healthy habits that are good for the prevention of lots of chronic diseases like diabetes or cardiovascular disease, arthritis, cancer. And so thinking about that, our Bureau has a new program through the BOLD grant, which really focuses on prevention of Alzheimer's and other dementias. You work very closely with Kyla Rock, who is here today. So Kyla, since you're the program manager, can you explain more about what is the BOLD grant and what do you focus on?
Melanie and I we've spent some windshield time together, and we brainstorm constantly about our pipe dreams for what we would love things to look like in the state of Montana to address Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And as you can tell, it's very enjoyable. She's very fun to talk to. One of the things I was thinking of as Melanie was talking about learning new skills and activating different parts of the brain, the other thing that's been found to be really beneficial is participating in Tai Chi. Again, you're activating those different parts and learning, the different movements. Those different ways that you're engaging your brain can really be really beneficial as well. I also just wanted to mention some of the there's so much amazing research like Melanie was talking about that's happening. And there's also some really great research that's actually happening in our back doors in Montana. There's a researcher at MSU who's looking at loneliness and how that can impact and increase risk for developing dementia and a lot of other related things, as Mackenzie had talked about earlier as well. Also through U of M, there's somebody who's looking at social determinants of health. So socioeconomic status, education level, rural versus urban. I mean, all of those different things can impact. And what does that look like long term for folks? So the BOLD grant really is, like you said, Mackenzie, is really taking things from a public health approach and trying to ensure that we're getting ahead of the game versus reactionary. So how do we address some of these things earlier? And again, engaging in those activities that Melanie just went over that are healthy for your brain are healthy for everything else, right? What's good for your head is good for your heart, is good for your body, that type of thing. So that really is a focus. The BOLD grant it's a 5-year grant cycle, and we are at the end of our first year. And the first year really focuses on building or sustaining a coalition. So ensuring that we've got a group of people that can speak to all the various areas that we've discussed and that Melanie's story has illustrated to help address and create a plan for the state. And Montana was actually ahead of the game in that aspect because they had a coalition that was formed about 10 years ago that they were looking at some of these issues 10 years ago. So there's been a group of people that have been in place already doing some work within Montana, which has been really great. So we've had a great and enthusiastic group of people to work with so far to kind of get the ball rolling. So really what my job has been recently is working with that group. We did, under the umbrella of that coalition, create a BOLD steering committee that does focus on the goals and tasks of the grant specifically. And so we're talking about a variety of different things right now, looking at maybe doing some asset and resource mapping to get a picture of what is happening throughout the state already. Every meeting I go to, every September is the Walk to End Alzheimer's Month. And so I've been attending those walks with Melanie throughout the state that I think she had referenced earlier. And the conversations you have with people are just, I mean, it's amazing. The enthusiasm, the passion, and how it does impact. It impacts everybody. I was last night just at a a social event with some friends doing some crafting at a place. And the lady who was helping us talked about her experience with her, one of her in-laws right now that's experiencing it. She was also a professional caregiver at an assisted living. And so it really is impacting everybody. And so making sure that we are, that we've got a variety of voices at the table to then move forward with the next phase of the grant would be creating a state plan. And CDC has worked very closely with the Alzheimer's Association to create some pathways. They've created the Healthy Brain Initiative Roadmap series that kind of has some different domains and focuses to help move the work forward.
So you mentioned the walks, and is this the same thing as the Alzheimer's Association Walk to End Alzheimer's? And what is that? What do these walks look like in Montana? How can you participate? What's the benefit?
So I may pass this back to Melanie in just a minute, but I will just talk about my experience. People are able to come out, you're able to create teams, and really it's a fundraising event to further the research and support in finding a cure, really. I've got to talk about the one of the really cool things they do at the walk. And then if Melanie wants to specifying, maybe get a little more technical in detail on what the walk looks like. At every walk, they do this promise garden. And it's kind of a really neat event. So they've got these pinwheel flowers that they have out, and each color represents a different aspect or impact of Alzheimer's disease. So they've got a blue flower that represents those living with dementia. A purple flower is those that have been lost to Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. They've got orange, which is to support the research and the work in this field. And then yellow is to celebrate caregivers and recognize the impact on the loved ones and the people caring for folks. And then they do kind of a neat little thing where they've got people that walk up holding a flower, and then they also add a white flower, which is the idea and the hope that one day there will be a world without it. And that's usually held by a child. And so to say that, look, one of these days, this kid may be able to grow up, and when they leave the world, it's not going to be a world with this disease. And so it's really kind of it's a cool event. And there's, vendors and DJs, and I don't know if Melanie has other things she'd like to add from the Alzheimer's Association perspective, but they're enjoyable.
Yeah, it's kind of our chance to be full mission, to show everybody what we're all about, from our research to our advocacy to programs to people we partner with, and then really celebrate and honor those that are on this journey that have lost somebody. I cry, I think, at every single one, but it's just very moving, and to see the people impacted and to hear the stories is incredible. And then the walk is more just a time to think about and honor those that are on this journey and bring more awareness and respect the people that are on this journey, whether they're living with it or caregiving. And it is our biggest fundraiser. We have 6 in Montana. We had Great Falls, Billings, Helena, and Bozeman, Kalispell, and Missoula. And it's also so that we can bring our resources free to caregivers. We know the financial burden, it's greater than any other caregiver. There are statistics that show that more out-of-pocket money is spent caregiving for somebody with dementia than any other caregiver. And so we don't want finances to be in the way of somebody getting resources.
So the Alzheimer's Association is doing a lot of great work. We know that you were accessing the 24/7 hotline at one point in your experience. Can you tell us what other resources are available that the listeners could know about?
I'll start with the Alzheimer's Association, and then I'll dip my toe into what Kyla said about the other resources. So we have 2 tools that I really like, especially for people living in rural Montana, because you can do them from home. One is called the ALZ Navigator, ALZ Navigator. It's an online care plan program that will ask you a few questions and then actually prepare a plan for you. So if you're having trouble getting somebody to shower, or if you're worried about guns in the home, or you're worried about driving in dementia, or taking medications, you can go to this ALZ Navigator, and anybody can use it. It's free of charge again. And you can answer a few questions, and it will create a care plan for you and give you resources of places that you can go. So for example, in Montana, and there's alcohol too. In Montana, I think the 3 calls I get the most often are gun related. What do we do about guns in the home? driving is a big one in Montana, and then alcohol abuse or use. I'm not sure what happens when people develop dementia. I'm not sure if they're self-medicating some of the anxiety or if they've just forgotten that if they've already been drinking and they decide to start drinking. My mom used to tell us she was having one glass, and we're like, well, one glass, how often? There's all of those issues that people don't like to talk about. And I was one of those. It's like, oh, this is so embarrassing. My mom never drank in her life. And all of a sudden we're running into this. And you think, I've got to hide that. I can't tell anybody. But then once you understand the disease, you realize this is a symptom of the disease. Or the driving piece. Understand that you are taking away their rite of passage in Montana, which is driving. That's everybody's rite of passage, and it's something that we are all very independent and stubborn about. And guns too in Montana. That's a big issue. So being open about these things, talking about them, and then using this ALS Navigator can be very helpful. The other one that's very helpful is called ALS Connected. So it's ALZ Connected. And it's more of a discussion board. So it's not a virtual support group, but during COVID, I went on there and I typed in, what are people doing to stay in touch with their loved ones in assisted livings? And there were lots of ideas. And one thing I started doing based on that was I would do Walmart orders for my mom. And a Walmart order was me calling mom and saying, hey, mom, would you like some snacks or would you like something special from Walmart? I'll order it for you. And then they would deliver it to her assisted living. And to her, it was like Christmas. Getting this little Walmart order was amazing. And I'd always throw in a little extra something, like maybe some nail polish or a little craft for the holidays, or I would throw in something extra for her along with some treats and snacks, which we found out after COVID, she really wasn't out of stuff because we found cupboard loads of what she asked for. But anyway, it gave her something to do. But what was really interesting is as she progressed in the disease and moved into memory care, I could still use that. When she'd get really, really upset, I'd say, hey, mom, do you want a Walmart order? And she'd go, oh, yes, that would be so great. And I never did it because I knew she'd forget as soon as we got off the phone. But just the memory of what the Walmart orders meant to her would calm her down. So, and I got that off the ALS Connected discussion board. So there's that resource. And then like Kyla said, our AAAs, Area Agencies on Aging, across Montana, are a great resource for local communities. Even our extension agents, MSU Extension is working in this area, or starting to work in this area, and they can be a huge resource. And especially with the financial part, the estate planning, which is a big deal in Montana, reaching out to your doctor. It doesn't have to be a neurologist to start with. You can go to your doctor and say, I want to have this discussion. I think that's a good resource. And so many people think, well, I have to wait for a neurologist. Well, no, you can go to your doctor and say, I'm concerned today. And I want to talk about this today. Like Kyla said, there's private agencies all over the state that are doing amazing work. And that's what we're trying to pull together, are all these resources that we're finding out are available.
And then, yes, programming with MSU Extension, they're doing some caregiver retreats that people are really enjoying, as well as some mobile memory cafes. I'm not sure how long those are going to continue, but that is something that is occurring currently, as well as a food box program, which is a really a way to kind of provide some respite. Because as we've been talking about the significant impact on when it comes to caregiving and the need for respite and some of that self-care, one of the ideas is that you can provide a meal, and that eliminates kind of one little stressor that can be a thing for folks. So that's something that's happening as well. There's also, again, a lot of private agencies doing this work, home health care. When, Melanie talked about, I think I failed to add kind of some of my personal experience and how I got involved. And when I started in human services, I started as a CNA and doing some home health care and working in assisted living and doing that work. And I actually was able to help care for two of my friends' grandparents who one had Parkinson's and one had Alzheimer's disease. And so that was kind of a neat. I mean, I loved the work. It's hard. And having those conversations with the loved ones or the spouse, it was just so, she every once in a while would just say, it's just so hard. I'm just losing my best friend every day. And so for her to have the opportunity to kind of take a step away and go have lunch with friends was really a neat thing to be able to do. So again, those home health agencies can be really beneficial. The other piece is the lifespan respite grant, which is offered through DPHHS, and that can be applied for online. And there's some funding. One of the most difficult things with securing any sort of respite for folks is finding a person. So that can be really hard. And there's not necessarily through the lifespan respite grant that there isn't necessarily an answer for that piece there, but there is some funding. So hopefully people have a neighbor or family member or somebody who can maybe jump in and assist, but there is some funding that they can access through the lifespan respite grant.
I have a question. This might be for Melanie or either of you. How many memory care facilities do we actually have in Montana?
I'm not totally sure. Memory cares are, private, more for profits. They're a little bit harder to track. Nursing homes are maybe a little bit easier to track, although they are closing in Montana. We just lost 2 more, I think, in the last 6 months. We were down 200 beds about a year ago. I also have a staff person in Missoula who was at a facility, and they showed him a wing of beds and said, but we don't have staff. And so they can't open up that wing. I think to Kyla and I, that's why this whole idea of getting in front of the disease and working on the prevention piece. And then also for me, if you are diagnosed, how can you stay in those earlier stages longer is so critical, because those facilities are struggling right now, and I don't know what the answer is. And so maybe saving those for the more severe cases, the very late stages, and hopefully take the burden off of them so that they are focused on those who really need it. Right now, everybody does, but I think it's because we don't have anything in place. It's like we talk about this so much. People on the dementia journey think they can do it, and they do it as long as they can. And then there's that breaking point where all of a sudden they're like, I can't do this another day. And all of a sudden they want or need a place right then at that moment, because it's crisis moment. It's gotten out of their control. And so how do we help them along the way so that maybe they have things in place before then, and they're not reaching that moment of crisis where all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, I can't do this another day. And then there's nothing available. How do we put more support in place throughout the entire journey to help them so that they don't burn out, or they have more tools and resources and they know what to do to help throughout the journey, or just keep people in the earlier stages longer so that we're not getting to that point where we're in a crisis point in Montana right now. There are no beds available. Almost every memory care and nursing home person I've talked to lately has said we're full.
And those are tracked as far as some of that, the quality assurance kind of that happens as far as the state isn't concerned, does happen through Senior Long-Term Care Division. And so they do kind of track how many, but as far as a specific number, I'm not sure either. But one of the other things I also kind of wanted to piggyback off of what Melanie was talking about with what we can do to kind of get in front, as well as to kind of stave off some of that progression. So folks are staying in the earlier stages. Those healthy brain 10 things to do to keep your brain healthy can also help when people do already have the disease. I mean, we were at a workshop in Butte, and the Springs has a memory care center at their facility. And one of the things they were talking about doing is they really try to make sure that they get some physical activity for their residents during the day, because it can help alleviate some of those, what Melanie had talked about earlier, the sundowning, some of those things that can happen at night for folks that can really help. Again, healthy diets and things like that. There's other research to show that can have a significant impact on how your brain functions, again, whether you have the disease or not. And so those are important factors and things to keep in mind as well. But yeah, the beds are tough. And then if they do find a bed, the other piece is that financial impact on the family. They're extremely expensive. They're not covered by insurance. And so that's the other really difficult piece, is the financial burden that the families kind of experience.
So I have a couple follow-up questions about the resources that were mentioned. The first, before we met today, I went through the Alz Navigator just to see what it was like, and so a ton of resources are provided. I was talking with Kyla earlier about how talking about end of life care and planning for that is really uncomfortable for many people. And I found that there's a ton of legal resources on how to create a will, how to create power of attorney, anything that you need help with. I found that on the Alls Navigator. And one of the questions that seemed to come up multiple times when you were putting in what you needed or what information you needed was if you or a loved one identifies as LGBTQ. And I wondered, why is this information important to know when gathering resources?
I'm not sure what specific questions you were being asked, but we are putting a lot of focus on the LGBTQ plus community. There's a lot of fear of seeking medical help, of seeking support, of even reaching out. But I know as an association, that's definitely first and foremost on our minds, is that lack of social support that most people have, and being afraid to reach out for help.
I just wanted to add just a couple things. As we all know, there are marginalized populations, and LGBTQ folks are certainly part of that. So I think it is really important to make that we are making a concerted effort to address some of those needs within this population related to Alzheimer's and dementia, because there is a fear, and it's still happening today because people are living as who they are, and as we all want the freedom to do. And so it's important that we are making concerted efforts to make sure that we are meeting the needs of these populations.
Thanks, Kyla. Also on the website, there are numerous amounts of information, web pages, in addition to the Alls Navigator. How would you recommend people navigate the website if they have an idea of what they want, but don't know what it's called or where to go?
I would recommend they reach out to the helpline first. What I love about the helpline is they'll also send some hands-on material in the mail, so they can direct them more specifically, but then also give them additional brochures or flyers or information specific to what they're looking for.
Thanks, Melanie. And for listeners, it's a 24/7 helpline. The number is 800-272-3900. Is there any other information regarding the helpline that Melanie or Kyla, you want to talk about?
I try to encourage first responders to use it. I encourage staff at assisted living facilities to use it, neighbors. It's not just restricted to the person living with the one they're caring for. Anybody can reach out.
As well as, I just wanted to add, also been people who have called in about themselves.
Yeah.
So that's, certainly another, like Melanie's saying, is for anybody and everybody to call and have those conversations and ask any questions. If they're not comfortable doing that with, somebody they know, this is a great place to go.
So kind of going back, I am really interested in what compassionate communication looks like and how that plays a role in supporting a person with Alzheimer's.
When we communicate with somebody with Alzheimer's, we always say feelings over facts. So we're not there to correct them. If they say it's Christmas tomorrow, it's not our job to tell them, no, it's July 25th. It's just to enter into their reality and maybe discover why they're talking about Christmas, or maybe Christmas brings good memories for them and, it's something that makes them feel good. So really entering into their reality, trying not to argue with them or tell them they're wrong. Their brain really can't find that information anymore. There's cellular death in the brain that has taken place because of dementia, and the neurons are not able to synapse and get that correct information into their brain. If they're going outside in the middle of winter and they're dressed like summer, of course, we're not just going to say, oh, go ahead and go. But we're going to find creative ways to say, I think I'm going to grab a coat. Would you like a coat too? It seems like it might be a little chilly. And, try to enter into the situation with them. It's all about compassion. It's all about coming from a place of love, not correcting, not judging, meeting them where they're at. When my mom thought that I looked like her daughter, I went with it. For one thing, when I told, my mom would look at me sometimes at the end and she'd say, now, who are you? And when I told her I was her daughter, she would just burst into tears. It devastated her to not recognize her daughter. And so I tried to avoid that because I didn't want her last month to be spent, devastated that she didn't recognize me. So I just say, well, who do you think I am? And then I'd go with whatever she said. So it's really about their quality of life. And also we have found that we can de-escalate behavior starting with communication. Sometimes, if you argue with them, they don't know how to argue back or they don't know how to process that. So then they start acting out and they might punch or they might hit. My mom had never hit anybody in her life before, but she showed up one night for dinner without pants on at the assisted living. And I'm not sure how she was approached, but however she was approached, she didn't like. So when they told her to put some pants on, she hit the person because she would have never hit somebody before, but she didn't know how to respond to that situation. And so she reacted with a behavior. And so coming at it, you really have to know the person though, and know how they like to communicate and know a little bit about them to really come back to that point of communicating in a way that will de-escalate behaviors, de-escalate stress and anxiety and keep them calm. Because ultimately at this point in time, that's what it's all about. It's quality of life. They will never come back to that lucid point. There might be lucid moments, but they're not going to get their mind back. We don't have anything right now that will bring their mind back. And so we have to meet them where they're at and communicate from a place of compassion and love.
I hear how important it is to have, in the face of all of this and the effect it must have on you, the importance of having some levity in moments like you experienced with your loved ones. That's really important to be able to fit yourself into their scenario and be able to go with it. And I have heard that from other people as well. And I feel like that's one of the most important skills we can learn when we're trying to navigate someone with Alzheimer's.
It can backfire though. One time I sent my mom flowers just because. So she thought it was her birthday. So she was mad that nobody remembered it was her birthday. Definitely about entering their world and putting our ego aside. I learned that was one of the biggest things I learned with dementia is I had to put my own ego aside when we went out to eat or went shopping. It wasn't about how we looked anymore. It was about mom's experience and making that the best it could be. And she might have dressed goofy compared to how she used to dress. And her hair might not have been as combed and nice as it used to be. But you know what? She was having the time of her life. And that's all that mattered to me. And I didn't get hung up on her hair. I wasn't one of those that was like, we can't go out in public looking like this. I'm like, you know what? We're having a good time. That's all that matters right now.
Absolutely.
What else did we not ask that you wanted to share?
There are some legal clinics that happen through DPHHS. And then there's also helping people walk through that end of life planning, POAs, some of that type of work. And again, MSU Extension is certainly a great resource. They also have a lot of information. They publish things called Mont guides, and there's a variety of information and specific topics that they have included on those as well.
Also, for listeners, we will have a list of these resources on our website for Talking Health in the 406. So we'll include ones we know about and all the ones that you've mentioned here today.
Thank you for listening to the Talking Health in the 406 podcast, where we are one community under the big sky. We are your hosts, Mackenzie Jones and Margaret Mullins. We'd like to thank our guests, Melanie Williams and Kyla Rock, for sharing their story and providing resources to support caregivers and individuals with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. If you would like more information on what you heard today, visit our website at talkinghealthinthe406.mt.gov. If you haven't already, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. With that, I'll close out with the wise words of Melanie's mom. We sure are complicated creatures, aren't we?